WeOmaha News on KPAO.
Hello, welcome to WeOmaha News. My name is Deshaun Cunningham.
And I'm Kitrin Zeichel.
Today we are going to talk about the Rice-Poindexter case. For those of you who don't know, in 1970, a suitcase bomb exploded in a vacant house in North Omaha, killing Omaha police officer Larry Menard and injuring others as well. 8 officers responded to a phony 911 call that a woman had been dragged screaming into the house. 2 young men from North Omaha, David Rice, who is now called Mondo Walonga, and Ed Poindexter, were accused of making the bomb and using 16-year-old Dwayne Peak as their accomplice to plant the bomb in the house and call 911. Mondo and Ed had been members of Omaha's Black Panther Party and later the militant organization, the National Committee to Combat Fascism. They have maintained their innocence for 45 years, but in spite of numerous appeals, have been unable to get back into court to prove their innocence. In February of 2016, the internet website BuzzFeed published a long article about the case by author Elena Carter called The Forgotten Panthers. You can find a link to the article on WeOmaha News Facebook page. For now, we talked with our anchor, Kitrin Zeichel, about the work she's done investigating the case with Mondo and Ed. Now, Kitrin, how did you first get involved in researching the Rice-Poindexter case?
Well, I came to Omaha in 1990 as an actor. I did some work at the Omaha Magic Theater. And in the year I was here, I met a guy who worked on the British documentary that was made about the case. He did the lights and the sets and the props and everything. And he told me the story. And when I got back to New York City, I told the story to someone I knew who was at Columbia University Journalism School. And when he graduated from Columbia, he was working for Primetime Live. And they let him come out to Omaha to do some research. He interviewed Ernie Chambers and the attorneys and Mondo. And then he went to where Dwayne Peak was living. And he tried to do an interview with Dwayne Peak, but Dwayne wouldn't talk to him. So when he got back to New York City, his producers at Primetime Live told him that unless he could crack the case, unless he could get Dwayne Peak to confess that he told a lie, that there was no story. And so at that point, I wrote to David Rice. This was like the fall of 1993. And I just said to him, I told the only person I know in the media what happened to you and nothing is going to come of it. And I just want you to know, I can't believe that happened in Omaha, Nebraska. And I just want you to know that I think about you from time to time. And I remember I was nervous when I wrote the letter because I was writing to someone who I had been told was framed by the FBI. And then Mondo wrote back to me and we became like pen pals. For a number of years we wrote quite frequently. And I returned to Omaha in 1994 to perform a one-woman show about the Adam and Eve story. And I decided that I would like to do some research about this case. And then once I started to do the research, it took on a life of its own. And I feel this commitment to solve the central question. If Mondo and Ed didn't make the bomb, who did? And who made the 911 call? It's not Mondo, it's not Ed, and it's not Dwayne Peak. So who is that guy? Because he is the one who was responsible for the death of Larry Menard. And to this day, we don't know who he is.
Now, this case is going on 40 years at this point.
45.
45,
46.
Wow. So where does it stand legally with Mondo and Ed's case?
They're out of appeals. Ed and Mondo both tried to get back into court on the voice analysis of the 911 call that proved Dwayne Peak was not the caller, but the courts ruled that perjury about making the call wasn't sufficient to grant a new trial. The only way to get back into court would be to discover new evidence.
Are they eligible for parole, or is that just based on finding new evidence, like you said?
They got life sentences, and that would have to be commuted to a time served to be pardoned or paroled. In the 1990s, the parole board voted 6 times to recommend them for parole because of their exemplary behavior and accomplishments while in prison. But their attempts at parole were opposed by the police and the family of the victim, and then the pardons board would not grant them a hearing. 20 years later, they are old and ill. Mondo is 68 and Ed Poindexter is 71. Mondo is critically ill with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. He has been living in the infirmary since October and has been rushed to the hospital more than once. His defense committee, Nebraskans for Justice, is asking people to write to the governor, the attorney general, and the secretary of state, who are the pardons board, to ask that Mondo be released on compassionate release. Those addresses and a sample letter can be found on the website www.n2pp.info, which stands for Nebraska's 2 Political Prisoners. That's a website hosted by Buddy Hogan, who's a former head of Omaha's NAACP.
Okay. Now, the Black Panthers have been a controversial group since their inception, And in 2016, we're seeing a resurgence of a lot of this hostility towards Black Panthers, the ideas they stood for. Would be very easy to ignore for another 40 years. What makes you feel this case has not been presented well? What makes you think they're innocent? And in your research, what has been the most compelling evidence you found that could prove they are innocent?
Well, when I first did my research 20 years ago, I met with Ernie Chambers. And I interviewed him for about an hour in his office. And this would be about 4 years after the two British journalists, George Case and Joe Bullman, made a documentary about the case. And that documentary is also posted on Buddy Hogan's website, n2pb.info, so you can watch it there. In the documentary, the narrator claims that an uncle of Dwayne's, named Carl Washington, said that Dwayne told the police he made the bomb with his family, but the police put pressure on him to implicate Rice and Poindexter. And Ernie Chambers was disgusted that anyone would think Dwayne was capable of carrying a suitcase bomb with a clothespin triggering device around North Omaha for 6 hours on a Sunday afternoon without having it explode. And it hit me like a thunderclap that he was right. Dwayne Peak couldn't have done that. And that, I think, is the most compelling piece of evidence in this case. So Scott Blake, who's an activist here in Omaha, edited a 3-minute short video for me that retraces Dwayne's steps that he allegedly took with the suitcase bomb that had a clothespin triggering device. And let's go to that clip now. How would you feel if you were convicted for a crime you didn't commit and you spent 44 years in prison trying to prove your innocence? Do you think you would feel invisible? My name is Kitrin Zeichel. I came to Omaha to make a documentary about the case of David Rice and Ed Poindexter, who were convicted in 1970 for a suitcase bombing murder. I'll present the state's evidence against them. I want people to really think about what the prosecution claimed happened on that Sunday afternoon in North Omaha. In this short video, we're going to retrace the steps of the state's main witness, a 16-year-old named Dwayne Peak. He said he carried a suitcase bomb with a clothespin triggering device around North Omaha from 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 11 o'clock at night. He said he took the bomb into 3 different cars and to 2 residences without exploding. Here's a clothespin triggering device. These 2 thumbtacks are held apart by a wedge of wood. If the wedge comes out, a connection is made and the bomb explodes. The suitcase was supposed to have a hole the size of a nickel in it with 6 inches of insulated wire sticking out of it. No one who saw him that Sunday noticed the hole or the wire or asked him about it. Dwayne began his Sunday at 3508 North 24th Street, the clubhouse of the National Committee to Combat Fascism, a militant group that got in a lot of confrontations with the police. He said he got a car ride from a girl named Norma Alfrecht, who took him to David Rice's house at 2816 Parker Street to pick up the bomb. David Rice had supposedly been living with a live bomb in his bedroom for 7 days. At the trial, Dwayne said he opened the suitcase at David Rice's house and removed the blasting caps from the detonator. This surprised the defense because Dwayne had never said that before in any of his statements. Dwayne said Norma Alfrecht drove him from 2816 Parker to 2906 Lothrop with the suitcase so he could visit a woman who was a mother figure to him, Olivia Norris. He talked to her daughter Annie Lee. Then his brother Donald showed up. After a visit of about 20 minutes, they left with the suitcase and got in a car driven by their sister Teresa and her boyfriend Raymond Britt. Teresa drove her brothers to their sister Delia's apartment at 19th and Burdett Street. Dwayne stayed there until 10:30 at night. He said he went in the bathroom at some point and opened up the suitcase to put the blasting caps back into the dynamite, which would have rearmed the bomb. At 10:30, his sister Delia gave him a ride to 28th and Ohio with the live bomb. There were a total of 7 passengers in the car: his sister, her husband, his 2 nieces who were small children, and another couple. There were too many passengers in the car, so Dwayne put the live bomb in the trunk, and they drove from 19th and Burdett to 28th and Ohio. Amazingly, the bomb did not explode. First, Dwayne said he put the bomb in the middle of the room, standing up. At the trial, he said he laid it down in the doorway with the hole and the wire sticking straight up. The hole in the wire would have been visible to the officers if that statement was true. He said he sat on the porch railing for half an hour after he placed the bomb. No one noticed him. How would you feel if you were convicted based on testimony that changed constantly, testimony that was hard to believe? Would you feel invisible?
So if there was no bomb, what reason would Dwayne Peak have had to carry a suitcase around North Omaha at night?
Well, actually, Dwayne had a legitimate reason for having a suitcase because he was leaving the state to join the Job Corps. But in his first statement to police on August 28th, he told them that he got an anonymous note telling him to pick up a suitcase behind the Lothrop drugstore and take it to 28th and Ohio by around 10:30 at night. So if that statement is true, what we should be asking is who tricked Dwayne Peak into carrying a suitcase on that night? And that's a question that no one ever bothered to ask because no one questioned if he was able to carry a suitcase bomb for 6 hours without causing an explosion. Just like no one questioned whether he made the 911 call. Everyone just assumed that the kid was guilty.
Before, when people would be caught up with something like the Black Panthers, everyone just assumed they were guilty. But people have always maintained that the courts and the police work hand in hand to frame innocent people and hold them longer than they should be. Do you feel that there's more about this case the public needs to know now that we are starting to see, it be popular that the idea of people are being framed is happening and needs to be remedied?
Well, one of the most important pieces of evidence in this trial is the 911 call. So I think we should play a clip of that.
Emergency service. Up here on 28th in Ohio, man. The address is 2866, 2867 is Old Vacant House. I mean, this dude is drug this woman off in there, she in there screaming and shit, and I don't know what's going on. I'm right here across the street, I don't know what's going on, man.
2867 Ohio?
2866 or 2867 is Old Vacant House with a bunch of weeds around it, man.
Vacant house.
Yeah, she's in there screaming and shit, man.
What's your address, sir?
My address is 2865.
65 Ohio. All right, we'll have an officer check it out, sir.
Okay.
All right, sir.
So that's a deeper voice. That's a street accented voice. That caller has very distinct vocal patterns. The tape of the 911 call was never played at the trial. It was not turned over to the defense as part of their discovery motions. Then around 1978, Lieutenant James Perry of the Omaha Police destroyed the actual reel-to-reel tape of all the calls that came in that day. And he stated later in a deposition that he destroyed the tape because the trial was over as far as he was concerned. In 1980, a copy of the 911 call was found at the 911 call center, and it was given to Mondo's new post-conviction attorney, Father William Cunningham, a Jesuit priest who was a law professor from California. It was the first time the defense knew that Dwayne Peak did not make the 911 call, and both prisoners have tried to get back into court on the 911 call evidence ever since. Furthermore, Cunningham received an FBI memo through the Freedom of Information Act request that shows Glenn Gates, the assistant chief of the police in Omaha, did not want the 911 call analyzed by the FBI, and he did not want it played at the trial because it would be prejudicial against the case against Rice and Poindexter. It wasn't until 2006 that Ed Poindexter's attorneys got permission to subpoena Dwayne Peak to voice analysis to compare his voice to the voice on the 911 call. And here's a 1-minute comparison of Dwayne's voice at age 51 to the voice on the 911 call from 1970 when he was only 15 years old.
Up here on 28th in Ohio, man.
I'm here on 28th in Ohio, man.
The address is 2866, 2867 is Old Vacant House.
2866, 2867. It's an old vacant house.
I mean, this dude is drug this woman off in there, she in there screaming and shit, and I don't know what's going on.
And this dude has drugged this woman off. She's screaming and shit, and I don't know what's going on.
I'm right here across the street, I don't know what's going on, man.
I don't know what's going on, man.
2866 or 2867 is Old Vacant House with a bunch of weeds around it.
2866 to 2867. It's an old vacant house with a bunch of weeds around it.
She's in there screaming and shit.
Screaming and shit.
My address is 2865.
My address is 2865.
Okay.
Okay.
It cannot be stressed enough that correctly identifying the person who lured police to 2867 Ohio Street was not important to the courts. Neither the Nebraska Supreme Court nor the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals thought that this was enough to grant Mondo and Ed a new trial.
Now, did they have an alibi for the night? What were they claiming they were doing the night the bombing took place?
Absolutely. Ed went to a movie with a girl named Linda Walker, who was the daughter of a New York City police officer. They were together all evening. Ed was just leaving her house when the bomb exploded. They had gone to a movie, Cotton Comes to Harlem. And Mondo went to a party in Dundee where he slept over, and he was seen by numerous individuals. His friend Rae Ann Schmitz threw the party. She testified at the trial and became an attorney as a result of what happened to her young friend. In the summer of 2014, I videotaped Rae Ann's testimony of why she believes Mondo was innocent. Rae Ann Schmitz is a retired attorney in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. She testified for the defense at the Rice-Poindexter trial when she was a first-year law student. Her life was irrevocably changed by the conviction of her friend, David Rice, who now goes by the name Mondo Wilonga. Rae Ann worked in legal aid, as a public defender, and in mediation during her legal career. She has never wavered in her belief that Mondo Wilonga and Ed Poindexter are innocent.
I was called as a defense witness at David Rice's trial because he had been at my house at a party the night the bomb went off. About 15 people saw him there, and I had spent the day with him. We had been at a rally at Memorial Park, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon I drove him to Kuntz Park at the same time that Duane Peake testified that David was with him. And this is just one more lie that Duane Peake told at that trial. I did not know that I was going to be an alibi witness. I hadn't been prepared by the defense for my testimony. I spoke with the defense attorneys for a few minutes outside the courtroom before I took the stand. I thought that I was being called as a character witness for David because I knew him so well and because I wanted the jury to know who he really was. David was a Creighton Prep graduate. I met him when he was reading his poetry at Creighton University at a Free University class. I knew David as a community activist. I knew him as a social worker for Greater Omaha Community Action. I knew him as a guitar player at Holy Family Church, at Ecumenical Council, the first guitar masses. David was playing the guitar. I knew him as a delegate to the Douglas County Democratic Party. So this is the David Rice that I knew, and this is the David Rice that I want to introduce to the jury. David Rice was not a guerrilla warfare man. David Rice was not a violent man. I was there to give some context to the writings that David wrote in the NCCF newsletters that the prosecution had introduced into evidence. And what you need to know about David is that he was a performance artist and a comedian and a little bit of a clown and a political theater activist. And he loved pointing the finger at authority figures. He loved poking fun at people. He would go to the city council meetings and call Mayor Leahy Musalehi right to his face. He enjoyed that, trying to shake people up. He had a Super 8 camera that he would film the police as his response to police brutality in his neighborhood. So he was verbally responding to the violence that he saw taking place in the community. And the David Rice I know could not have made a bomb, and he could not have killed a police officer, and he certainly could not have used a 15-year-old boy in that kind of plot to cause that kind of violence. It just was not in his character. As exasperating as he was, as outrageous as the things were that he said.
If we're talking about Arthur Pig, and we're serious about this, then we're talking about urban guerrilla warfare, and we're talking about people using their brains. And you don't use your brain by throwing some bottles and some bricks and some pigs and digging some cruises. You off the pig by the means that are available to you, which can be easily...
Nobody believed that. Nobody who knew David Rice believed those things. They knew that it came from that sense of political theater. Unfortunately, the police didn't know that. The authority figures, the Douglas County attorneys didn't know that.
David Rice was very free about what he thought the answer to these problems were, and they generally included killing police officers.
They didn't know David, and I thought that was what I was at the trial for, to put all of this in some kind of context and let the public, let the jury know that David Rice was a peaceful man. The next time I was in the courtroom was the day the jury pronounced the verdict. I had gone with Katie, my roommate and David's girlfriend, and when they were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, we were devastated. I remember walking out of the courtroom and Katie could barely stand up. Her legs had just collapsed under her, and I was practically carrying her out of the courtroom. And she hated America for what they had done to David. And she saved her money and left the country. She moved to England, and she's lived there for 40 years. She never came back. So the public doesn't know the truth of David Rice. They don't know the injustice that took place in this trial, and they have no idea of the devastation that this has caused to countless lives by the wrongful conviction and imprisonment of 2 innocent men.
Now, is there anything else about this case that the public doesn't know? As a matter of fact, when it comes to murder investigations, much less a police officer murder investigations, there's a lot of details that the public isn't made aware of until sometimes years or decades after the case. What are some other things going on that you feel that would be good public knowledge?
A month before the bombing at 2867 Ohio Street, the ATF wanted to raid the headquarters of the National Committee to Combat Fascism on North 24th Street. An ATF agent named Tom Sledge put the name of a 12-year-old girl on an affidavit for a search warrant. She was the younger sister of Ed Poindexter's girlfriend, Linda Clark. The girl's name was Mary Alice Clark. Sledge claimed this girl saw 10 boxes of machine guns with 6 guns in each box at the NCCF. That's 60 machine guns. And he said she described them so accurately he knew they were AK-47s. He said she saw a box of 15 bundles of dynamite with 12 sticks to the bundle. That's 180 sticks of dynamite. He said she watched 5 men make a bomb out of dynamite, including Frank and Will Peak, who were cousins of Dwayne Peak.
Now, do you think Frank and Will Peak were the ones that made the bomb?
No, absolutely not. But unfortunately, some of the attorneys over the years have read that ATF affidavit and assumed that the information in it was true. But we know the FBI and the Justice Department both thought the information was a lie.
And how did you come to find this information out during your research?
Well, first of all, it was on the front page of the World Herald on August 22nd. The Justice Department was quoted in an article saying they thought the information in the affidavit wasn't credible. I interviewed former U.S. Attorney Bill Gallup in 2013. He told me that the FBI called the Department of Justice in Washington and told an attorney in the criminal division that they had an informant in the NCCF and there were not 10 boxes of machine guns or dynamite or men making bombs there. So the Department of Justice in Washington called Bill Gallup in Omaha and told him to tell ATF agent Tom Sledge to return the warrant to the court unserved, hand it back to the judge, and cancel the raid. The Justice Department specifically told Gallup it did not want any more raids on Black Panther houses like the one in Chicago that killed Mark Clark and Fred Hampton. So in this instance, the Omaha FBI were the good guys. They stopped a raid that could have resulted in a gunfight in a residential neighborhood that could have killed members of the NCCF, police, or innocent bystanders. Further evidence that the information in the affidavit is a lie is that Tom Sledge never told Mrs. Clark that he met her daughter. Mrs. Clark was not present when Mary Alice allegedly made these statements to Tom Sledge. Mary Alice never told anyone else that she saw machine guns, dynamite, or men making bombs at NCCF headquarters. And remember, this is a 12-year-old girl. If she saw those things, you think she might have told someone else. Then Mary Alice disappeared 2 years later. She was never seen again, and her mother petitioned the court to declare her dead in 1980. The Clark family did not know that Tom Sledge had named Mary Alice on that affidavit until 1995, when I told her sister Vicki about it. From that point on, until she died, Mrs. Clark wondered if Mary Alice was in a witness protection program, but she had no idea how to find that out.
What can be done now about Mary Alice Clark's part in with what happened to Mondo and Ed?
Well, Ed Clark, Mary Alice's older brother, has a petition on change.org asking the Department of Justice to investigate Tom Sledge for lying on an affidavit for a search warrant. That's a crime. Tom Sledge should have been investigated and fired in 1970 for lying on an affidavit for a search warrant. Instead, he was the lead ATF investigator of the bombing at 2867 Ohio Street. He personally transported Ed Poindexter's clothing and dynamite samples to the ATF lab in Washington, D.C., giving him the opportunity to plant dynamite in Ed's pocket. Neither Mondo nor Ed tested positive for dynamite residue on their hands, yet they both had so much dynamite in one of their pockets it was visible to the naked eye. At the trial, the ATF chemist testified he didn't have to put it under a microscope. He could just see they were particles of dynamite. Mondo was photographed with his hands in his pockets right before he turned his clothes over to the police and the ATF. So we know that dynamite had to be put in his pocket after that picture was taken. That picture is proof that he had no dynamite in his pocket.
Now, do you feel that there is enough evidence, there's enough documentation that Mondo and Ed could be released? And if you feel that there's enough to prove their innocence, what do you think it would take to get them out of jail as it stands now? Or do you even think it's possible at this point?
I think because of their age and their illnesses, they should be released on compassionate release, but I do think the Department of Justice should investigate not just this case, but everything that the ATF was doing in 1970 to eliminate the Black Panther Party, not just here in Nebraska, but also in Iowa and in Minneapolis and in Kansas City. And it's a short show, and I can't tell you everything I know. So the Department of Justice would have to launch an investigation, and there are some documents that were received through the Freedom of Information Act request that should at least help them open a door, not just by investigating Tom Sledge, but investigating everything the ATF was doing to get rid of the Black Panther Party. But that would take years.
For more information on Mondo and Ed's case, visit n2pp.info. To sign the petition for Mary Alice Clark, visit change.org. And if you would like to read the full article, The Forgotten Panthers by Elena Carter, you can find it on the WeOmaha News Facebook page. And that concludes our episode for tonight. Thanks for watching WeOmaha News. My name is Deshaun Cunningham.
And I'm Kitrin Zeichel.
This has been WeOmaha News.